Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Great Expectations. By Charles Dickens. From December 1, 1860, through August 3, 1861, it was published in weekly installments. With the passage of time, Great Expectations depicts the maturation of a young man who discovers that his great expectations of material success do not equate to virtue and contentment. Philip Pirrip, or Pip, is the protagonist of the book, which spans 30 years of his life. When the story begins, he is 7 years old and meets an escaped convict named Provis. He changes his perspective on the world at the age of 12. He is introduced to Miss Havisham's ward, Estella, while entertaining the eccentric old lady. Estella, despite her good looks, is a harsh woman. Despite this, Pip develops feelings for her and sets out to better himself in order to win her affections. His expectations of the old woman to turn him into a gentleman and allow him to marry her ward lead him to believe he is above his family. The only problem is that he discovers she merely planned to exploit him to teach her ward the art of heartbreak. Several years prior, Miss Havisham had been dumped by her husband to be on the altar. She is now confined to her room, where she waits. In her bridal dress, she eats her cobweb-infested wedding breakfast and gets ready for the big day. It's as if the moment she got the note from her fiancé dissolving their relationship, all the clocks in her house stopped. Years go by as Pip serves as an apprentice to his brother-in-law Joe. One day he discovers that his luck has changed. In order to become a gentleman, he is given the funds to do so. The second phase of Pip's journey begins in London. He attracts both friends and foes. Later, in his 30s, he discovers that the convicted felon he rescued at the start of the novel paid for his social advancement. Pip is forced to examine his life after attempting to assist his benefactor. It begins with a young boy examining some gravestones at a cemetery. A total of 6 people will benefit from these gifts: his mother and father, 5 young boys, and he himself. Initially, he could only pronounce Pip instead of Philip Pirrip when he began to speak. His full name is Philip Pirrip. That's why he's known as Pip. A gruff man approaches him as he imagines his parents and baby brothers that he never knew. He is a convicted felon. To get Pip to bring him food and a file for taking off his leg cuffs, he threatens and threatens. He made Pip promise to return promptly and not to expose the convict's identity to anybody else. East of London, in a marshy village along the Thames, Pip lives with his sister and her husband in a modest cottage. He refers to his sister and brother-in-law as Mrs. Joe Gargery and Mr. Joe Gargery respectively. To intimidate Pip and her husband, his sister wields a cane she nicknamed Tickler. Joe, the blacksmith, is a nice and gentle person. It's Christmas Eve, so Pip is forced to spend the night stirring the pudding because he was caught smuggling some bread and butter out of the house. Tar water is what his sister has threatened to give him as punishment. So, Pip won't be able to meet the convict until the following morning. A pork pie and a bottle of brandy are also on Pip's list. Tar water was used to refill the container he had just emptied. Pip snatches Joe's file before he heads out the door. Pip scares another escaped inmate away the first time he sees him. As soon as the man discovers the original criminal, his life is in jeopardy. He's shaking like a leaf because it's so cold out there. He's drenched and starving. When Pip discusses the other criminal, the man reverts back to his old ways. While the man is removing his leg irons, Pip walks away. The remorse that Pip feels when he returns home is tempered by the fact that he maintains his pledge and does not tell anybody about the criminal he helped. The two of them head to church together after breakfast. Mrs. Joe has prepared a Christmas dinner for the couple when they arrive at their house. Dinner guests include Pip's well-off Uncle Pumblechook, Mr. Wopsle, Mr. and Mrs. Hubble, and the church clerk. Pip is frightened that his food thievery will be discovered. When they open the brandy and find the tar water substitute, he's on the verge of being busted. A sergeant and a small group of troops appear just as Pip was about to lose his cool. The sergeant has handcuffs on him. The remorse that Pip feels when he returns home is tempered by the fact that he maintains his pledge and does not tell anybody about the criminal he helped. The two of them head to church together after breakfast. Mrs. Joe has prepared a Christmas dinner for the couple when they arrive at their house. Pumblechook, the church clerk, Mr. Wopsle, and Mr. and Mrs. Hubble dine with Pip's wealthy Uncle Pumblechook and his family. Pip is frightened that someone will catch him stealing food. When they open the brandy and find the tar water substitute, he's on the verge of being busted. A sergeant and a small group of troops appear just as Pip was about to lose his cool. The sergeant has handcuffs on him. Handcuffs are in need of a repair by Pip's wife's brother Joe. In the marshes, he tells Joe, they're looking for the fugitives who fled from prison. Joe and I have agreed to help them in their hunt. Pip worries for his prisoner. After Joe fixes the handcuffs, he offers to provide a hand to the soldiers in their hunt. Mr. Wopsle accepts the offer even though Mr. Hubble and Mr. Pumblechook, Pip is forbidden from calling him uncle, reject it. Joe inquires about taking Pip with him. She replies yes, but don't count on her to fix his head if it's blown off by a musket. The hunting party begins to hear noises in the distance after a lengthy search. Murder! Screams a man's voice. Shouted a second man, and then silence their inmates. Runaways. Guard. The fugitives should choose this route. They're in a fight when Joe, Pip, Mr. Wopsle, the sergeant, and his men arrive at the prisoners. I grabbed the other man and was turning him in, Pip's inmate claims. While admitting that he had the ability to flee, he insisted that the other man not be allowed to do the same. The Hulk had taken him back to the prison ship on board where they were all being held. So as not to implicate Pip in any way, he said that he had stolen a file and some food from the blacksmith shop. It's been a year since we last spoke. Mr. Wopsle's great aunt teaches Pip, but she falls asleep throughout class. While Mr. Wopsle's great aunt has no idea what she has on hand or how much it costs to purchase it, Biddy, her granddaughter, and Ward are there to keep an eye on her little leisure. Despite the fact that Mr. Wopsle's great aunt was paid to teach him, Biddy actually did most of the work. During a writing session at home, Joe joined him. He learns that Joe never learned to read or write. Joe declines Pip's offer to assist him in his studies. He's afraid Mrs. Joe wouldn't be happy about it. She enjoys the feeling of power. Mrs. Joe barged in on them as they were debating her. Uncle Pumblechook was with her at all times. She informed them that Uncle Pumblechook's landlord, Miss Havisham, had asked him if he might recommend a child to come over and play. He offered to make the link since he thought it would be beneficial for Pip. As a result, Pip is well cleaned before being transported in Uncle Pumblechook's carriage, where he wonders aloud what he was supposed to be playing at all these years. A quick breakfast and a test on his multiplication tables greet Pip the next morning after he's spent the night at his uncle's. A trip to Miss Havisham's estate follows. Status House is the name given to the building when it was constructed. In this context, the phrase enough house signifies nothing further is needed. Imposing, to say the least. There's a cute little girl waiting for them at the gate who doesn't like Mr. Pumblechook and takes Pip inside. To his surprise, he finds Miss Havisham to be an elderly woman dressed in a faded wedding dress and seated in a room surrounded by clocks that are all at 20 minutes to 9 minutes. Several half-packed trunks of strewn clothing stood nearby, each with only one shoe on. On the table beside her hand, she could see the other shoe. She expresses her desire to be pleased by him playing because she is sick of adults. It's hard to play alone, so she gets her ward Estella to join in on the card game. When she sees him, Estella is dismissive of him. While Pip is enamored by her beauty, he can't help but notice her roughness. For the sake of enjoying herself, Miss Havisham promises to return in 6 days to observe how things are progressing. After Estella's treatment of him, Pip rushes off to cry and bit since the day before he had considered himself much more knowledgeable than he does today. In spite of the fact that he was feeling sorry for himself, his anger was the most prominent emotion. Laughing, she pushes him out the gate after noticing that he had been crying. When he returns home, his family questions him about Miss Havisham and the manor. When Mrs. Joe and Uncle Pumblechook ask him about her, he gives them only the most cursory information since he doesn't want to betray her or Estella. That she had 4 dogs that fought over veal cutlets from a silver basket is an exaggerated version of the truth. Aside from playing with flags and swords, he explains to them. Prior to inventing any further magical features for his day, he escapes to visit Joe. It's only when he sees Joe that Pip reveals his deception. He tells him about Estella and how depressed he was about being a commoner in society. Joe chastises him for lying, but informs Pip that he is not like the rest of us. An uncommon scholar is what he is. The only way he can succeed is to stay on the straight and narrow and stick with his own people. After that, Joe sends Pip to his room to reflect on things. He believes the visit has made him less appreciative of his current position and motivated him to strive for a higher one. The majority of Pip's school's teachers, including Biddy, decide to help him become uncommon. A book for him to use at home is provided by her. On Saturday, Pip's sister dispatched him to the tavern to pick up Joe. Mr. Wopsle and a stranger are sitting at a table next to him. After buying a round of drinks for the group, the stranger begins to inquire about Pip's identity. Now the convict has the file Pip gave him and he stirs his drink so that Pip can only see it. One of the strangers hands Pip 2 1-pound notes. With the money he earns from odd tasks around town, Pip decides to donate them to his sister. Because she feels it was given to him in error, she keeps it hidden in an elegant teapot under some dried rose leaves. If he asks for it back, she'll give it to him. Pip's nightmares are haunted by the stranger and the file because he is haunted by remorse. As soon as Pip returns to Sati's house for the second time, Estella immediately directs him to a drawing room. There are 3 women and 1 male waiting outside the window for Miss Havisham's arrival. In his mind, they're toadies and humbugs from the start. These 4 individuals are known as the Pockets: Camilla, Mercy, Sarah, and Raymond. He appears in the stairwell after Estella brings him to take to Miss Havisham. Estella departs when they get to Miss Havisham, and Pip spends some time with her. Estella joins them when he calls her, so she shows him a cobweb-covered wedding cake and they go around the room. They go on to compliment Miss Havisham's demeanor. Because it is her birthday, she claims they are all there, and Pip believes her. After that, she asks him to play with Estella. Before going to bed, he goes for a walk in the garden and bumps into a dark-haired man. An angry man convinces him to fight. Estella gave Pip a kiss on the cheek after he won the bout. Pip visits every week for the next 3 months. He thinks he's making a good impression by pushing about Miss Havisham in a wheelchair. He's counting on her to elevate his social standing and provide him with the resources he needs to become a gentleman. He doesn't realize that Miss Havisham is taking advantage of the situation to enlist Estella's help in torturing him more. As he thinks he's going to rise in the ranks, he begins to feel like he's above his family and is humiliated by Jo. He spends most of his time chatting with Biddy and learning from her. While it is true that one day, Miss Havisham notices that he is no longer a child. His expectations of becoming a gentleman were dashed when she paid for him to be apprenticed to Jo, which enraged his sister. As Pip matures and learns his trade as Jo's blacksmith apprentice, the years pass. As much as he wishes he could return to Status House, he tries not to let his disappointment show. Jo had to study all Pip had learned from Biddy. His explanation was that he didn't want Jo to be the target of Estella's taunts, but rather someone worthy of Pip's friendship. To see Miss Havisham, Pip began to request a half-holiday from Jo as the days passed. A thank-you note was his explanation for his actions, he said. Inadvertently, Pip brought up the subject with Jo in front of his assistant, Dol Gorlick. Tormenting Pip was his favorite pastime, but Jo couldn't confront him about it. He was a slacker and a slacker. That's why he insisted on one after hearing Pip ask for one. When Mrs. Jo heard Jo agree to give them each a half-day off, she was standing outside the business. She was furious. The fight between her and Orlick led to the intervention of Jo, who stood up for her honor. Jo prevailed in the struggle, brought Mrs. Jo home after she fainted, and then returned with Orlick to clean up the mess. They had a beer together and appeared to be getting along fine. She opens the gate for Pip when he approaches Status House. In a wicked laugh, Miss Havisham claims that Estella has gone abroad to train to be a lady. When he arrives home, he discovers that a convict's leg iron has attacked his sister. Half of her body has been rendered invalid. It is possible that Pip suspects Orlick, or that the inmate who filed off the leg irons used in the attack had shown him the file. Unexpectedly, his sister made a point of stopping by Orlick's office every day to make sure the two were still on good terms. In the end, Biddy was the only one who was able to get to know Mrs. Jo. When Mrs. Jo had lost her explosive anger, she spent her time concentrating on maintaining control of her limbs and movements. Pip had been accustomed to his apprenticeship schedule. He would see Miss Havisham on his birthday every year. They had a short conversation, then she gave him a guinea pig. Estella's remarkable life would likewise be mentioned by her. Pip's desire to develop himself was sparked by this. He notices that Biddy is maturing into a beautiful young woman in a quick study. He marvels at her capacity to absorb all that he has ever learned and more. Estella tells Pip that Orlick is after her, and Pip confesses his feelings for her. 4 years into his training, Mr. Jaggers, a lawyer, tells Pip that someone has made the decision to educate him as a gentleman. In the words of his benefactor, great expectations should be his motto. After Biddy and Jo say their final goodbyes in tears, Pip departs for a brief stay with Uncle Pumblechook, disdaining his home village in the process. After a 5-hour bus ride, he finally arrives in London, which he finds distasteful. Crooked and filthy streets line the city. It is while waiting to see Mr. Jaggers that he meets Mr. Wemmick, the clerk of Mr. Jaggers, the lawyer, who helps Pip get a place to stay with Herbert, the son of Matthew Pocket, who Pip had an argument with long ago at Miss Havisham's birthday party. Miss Havisham's background is revealed to Herbert Pip. Having been the daughter of a wealthy brewer, she was spoilt. Arthur, a dishonest half-brother, conspired with her fiancé, Compeyson, who never showed up on their wedding day, but instead wrote a note of apology. To keep things as they were that day, she decided to put a stop to all of her clocks and leave her house as it was. She is frail and ancient, still wearing her faded wedding dress. For the sake of revenge, she plans to teach Estella the art of seducing men with her beauty and then torturing them. Pip is surrounded by two boys, Startop and Bentley Drummle, as he learns in the wacky pocket household. Wemmick's residence is where he spends his nights. After working with an elderly parent for years, Wemmick's demeanor shifts radically when he returns to his own house. He notes that Jagger's maid, Molly, has scarred wrists in a strange way when he spends the night in Jagger's cool, businesslike apartment. The news that Estella wants to see Pip brings Joe, who isn't happy about Pip's higher position, to the scene. It's a convict transport bus, and Pip recognizes a man who's talking to his friend about the file and 2-pound bills. Pip is quite concerned with maintaining his anonymity. Pip discovers Orlick working as a porter at Miss Havisham's. Even though Estella claims to have no emotion in her heart, Miss Havisham wants Pip to fall for her. Jaggers, who is also the lawyer for Miss Havisham, in London agrees to pay off Orlick after Pip warns him not to trust him. Because Herbert and Pip are so close, they share their secrets. Herbert confesses his feelings for Clara Barley, and Pip confesses his feelings for Estella. They go to the theater one night to see Mr. Wopsle's performance of Hamlet, which is a bit of a letdown. The Finches of the Grove, a social organization for young gentlemen, was a complete waste of time and money for the two of them. His sister's death has brought Pip back to the family home. The funeral director has Joe in his sights. Pip is heartbroken to leave Joe on this particular day, but pledges to return frequently. A gentleman in the making at age 21, Pip begins to manage his annual allotment of £500. That way, Wemmick will be able to help Herbert get started in the business world by locating a merchant who will open up a trading enterprise for him. That Bentley Drummle is interested in Estella enrages Pip. When Pip reaches the age of 23, one stormy night, his convicted felon reappears. His real name is Abel Magwitch, but many call him Provis. It is revealed to him that he is Pip's guardian. He's been in prison in Australia, where he amassed a fortune in sheep ranching, since he was convicted of the crime. To make sure his investment was a good one, he has returned to England illegally. For a time, Pip is appalled that he has to depend on a convicted criminal for his basic needs after leaving Joe's home. But then he begins to appreciate Provis's years of sacrifice and decides to help him escape from England. Hearing Provis' tales of crime, Pip and Herbert understand that the second inmate was Compeyson all those years ago. When he arrives in London, Provis, who would be executed if caught, is on his list of targets. As a result, Pip and Herbert disguise Provis and hide him with Clara Barley. Pip pays a visit to Estella before he and Provis depart the nation. At this point, he discovers that she intends to wed Bentley Drummle. When Pip and Jaggers have a second supper together, he notes that Molly's and Estella's plates are also the same shape as one another. There had been an earlier trial for Molly's murder, but Jaggers got her acquitted. Wemmick later tells him this. Her baby was kidnapped, but he hired her as a maid afterward. She signs a check for almost £900 when Pip returns to Status House so that he can keep supporting Herbert, who along with Matthew has been her sole altruistic family member throughout the novel. Asked for forgiveness, she admits she has no idea of Estella's past. It's all she knows that she requested Jaggers to bring her a child that she could care for and adore. Pip, convinced that Molly is Estella's mother, abandons Miss Havisham and roams around the house. When he returns a little while later to see how she's doing, he finds her dress on fire. While rescuing her, Pip suffers a severe burn to his body. During Herbert's care for Pip, he tells Pip that Provis is Estella's father, based on what he heard from Provis. In order to leave the country, Provis will be rowed down to the Thames, where he will board a steamer. Threatening letters appear asking Pip to travel to the Forge's ancient lime kiln alone in search of information on Provis. Gossip-obsessed Orlick has created this trap to kill him for sabotaging his relationship with Miss Havisham and interfering with his desire for the lady he desired. Orlick confesses to the murder of Mrs. Joe and to spying on Pip. Compeyson is now his boss. Pip is saved thanks to Herbert's quick arrival and assistance, but Orlick escapes. They head back to London, where they plan to continue Provis's escapation. Despite this, the authorities have Compeyson with them and detain them. The last showdown between Provis and Compeyson takes place in the waters of the River Thames. It's just Provis. Pip, who is imprisoned, is steadfast in his devotion to him. Including what he gave Pip, The government seizes the whole riches of Provis. Just moments before he passes away in a jail hospital, Pip reveals to Provis that his daughter Estella is still alive and well. It provides solace for him. When Pip falls really ill, Joe takes care of him and tells him that Biddy taught him how to read and write while he was in the hospital. Joe explains to him that Miss Havisham died and left her fortune to her family, which was shared equally. An attempt by Orlick to rob Mr. Pumblechook resulted in his arrest and imprisonment. Joe makes sure Pip's obligations are paid before he leaves London. Upon returning home, Pip resolves to ask Biddy to marry him, only to discover that Joe and Biddy had already wed. Consequently, he departs to accept Herbert's offer to join him in commercial operations outside of the United States. Pip returns to Estella after an absence of 11 years to discover that she has been widowed and that Joe and Biddy have 2 little children. Walking through Status House's ruins, Pip gets a sense of nostalgia. There, he meets a more mature Estella, who has grown to appreciate Pip as a result of her ordeal with the obnoxious Drummle. They're holding hands as they walk away. Philip Pirrip, Pip, the protagonist and voice of the story. At first, he is an orphan living with his sister and her husband, who are both violent to him. When it comes to right and wrong, he has an unwavering conviction. As he becomes more familiar with a more refined social milieu, he begins to set higher standards for himself. He feels humiliated in front of his loved ones. To him, the simple pleasures of working hard and going home to a warm place are tempered by the desire to mingle with the rich and powerful. Even a gorgeous person can be nasty, as he learns at the end of the novel. Money can't buy happiness. Joe Gargery, Pip's hard-working and gentle brother-in-law. In spite of being illiterate, he is a very intelligent man. Because he is a blacksmith, he is incredibly powerful. One who is truthful and unflinching in their dealings with others. As opposed to Pip, who is a gentleman by choice and thus lacks the ingrained sense of honor that Joe possesses, Joe is an amiable fellow who is born with it. Mrs. Joe, Pip's sister. She's 20 years older than Pip and resents being saddled with the responsibility of being his guardian. Because of the rough nature of her husband, she is always looking for someone who is more refined, like a craftsman, to be her husband. Illnesses leave her terrified and paralyzed. Biddy, the young woman who is the assistant to Pip's teacher while he is a child. She is a naturally brilliant person who absorbs all the information she comes across. After Joe's mother dies, she continues to teach Joe how to read and write. Miss Havisham, an unusual old lady who lives in a huge home called Status Manor. To get back at her ex-boyfriend, she instructs Estella to be savage towards men as a form of retribution. In her tattered wedding dress, she spends every day at the table of the cobweb-coated wedding meal. When her fiancé terminated things, she had all the clocks in her house set to the moment she received the letter. Estella, her name means star. Miss Havisham takes her in after her parents, both of whom are on death row, abandoned her. She is indoctrinated to be calculating and calculating. A vow of chastity instead, she'll utilize her good looks to seduce men before turning on them and doing her dirty deeds to them. She is frank and to the point. In the end, she understands that all of the lessons she was taught distorted her worldview and led to her misery. The reader is led to believe that she will discover true love with Pip in the end. Provis, his real name is Abel Magwitch, but he is called Provis, which would refer to destiny. He selected the name Abel because he is a shepherd in Australia, where he makes a lot of money. To save another convict's life, he relinquishes his freedom at the start of the novel. On the other end of the line is Australia. Taking advantage of Pip's kindness to him as a child, Provis decides to help him mature into a gentleman. When he returns to England to investigate the results of his investment, he meets Pip and aids him in his maturation. Provis learns he's the father of Estella just before he passes away. Portsmouth, England, was the birthplace of Charles Dickens, 1788 to 1870. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest authors in the history of the written word. When his father was imprisoned for debt, Dickens was taken out of school at a young age. He was compelled to work in a blacking warehouse, an experience that would have a lasting impact on his subsequent writing. Dickens returned to school after his father was released from prison, although he was largely self-taught. After completing his education, he worked as a legal clerk before transitioning to a career as a court reporter and member of parliament. In 1833, under the alias Boz, he began publishing amusing descriptions of daily life in London. As a result of his widely acclaimed essays and illustrations, the Pickwick Papers was published. As a result, a brand new form of storytelling emerged in London, the serial novella. The novels Dickens wrote and edited, as well as his charitable efforts advocating for social change, helped him preserve his notoriety. He also had a theatre group that performed for Queen Victoria and gave readings of his own work to the public. He was a prolific writer. His success in business, however, did not translate into success at home. Despite the fact that the marriage had produced 10 children, the couple divorced in 1858 after an affair with a young actress and alleging incompatibility. Died in Westminster Abbey on June 9, 1870, and was interred there for 5 days afterward. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.